Mr. Sidelsky, whom I came to respect greatly and who treated me with enormous kindness, was a graduate of the University of the Witwatersrand and was in his mid 30s when I joined the firm. He was involved in African education, donating money and time to African schools. A slender, courtly man with a pencil moustache, he took a genuine interest in my welfare and future, preaching the value and importance of education for me individually and for Africans in general. Only mass education, he used to say, would free my people, arguing that an educated man could not be oppressed because he could think for himself. He told me over and over again that becoming a successful attorney and thereby a model of achievement for my people was the most worthwhile path I could follow. I met most of the firm's staff on my first day in the office, including the one other African employee, Gaur Radevi, with whom I shared an office. 10 years my senior, Gaur was a clerk, interpreter, and messenger. He was a short, stocky, muscular man, fluent in English, Sotho, and Zulu, and expressing himself in all of them with precision, humor, and confidence. He had strong opinions and even stronger arguments to back them up, and was a well known figure in Black Johannesburg. That first morning at the firm, a pleasant young white secretary, Miss Lieberman, took me aside and said, "Nelson, we have no color bar here at the law firm." She explained that at mid morning the tea man arrived in the front parlor with tea on a tray and a number of cups. "In honor of your arrival, we have purchased 2 new cups for you and Gaur," she said. "The secretaries take cups of tea to the principals, but you and Gaur will take your own tea just as we do. I will call you when the tea comes, and then you can take your tea in the new cups." She added that I should convey this message to Gaur. I was grateful for her ministrations, but I knew that the 2 new cups she was so careful to mention were evidence of the color bar that she said did not exist. The secretaries might share tea with 2 Africans, but not the cups with which to drink it. When I told Gaur what Miss Lieberman had said, I noticed his expression change as he listened. Just as you can see a mischievous idea enter the head of a child, "Nelson," he said, "at tea time, don't worry about anything. Just do as I do." At 11 o'clock, Miss Lieberman informed us the tea had arrived. In front of the secretaries and some of the other members of the firm, Gaur went over to the tea tray and ostentatiously ignored the 2 new cups, selecting instead one of the old ones, and proceeded to put in generous portions of sugar, milk, and then tea. He stirred his cup slowly and then stood there drinking it in a very self-satisfied way. The secretary stared at Gaur and then Gaur nodded to me as if to say, "It is your turn, Nelson." For a moment I was in a quandary. I neither wanted to offend the secretaries nor alienate my new colleague, so I settled on what seemed to me the most prudent course of action. I declined to have any tea at all. I said I was not thirsty. I was then just 23 years old and just finding my feet as a man, as a resident of Johannesburg, and as an employee of a white firm, and I saw the middle path as the best and most reasonable one. Thereafter, at tea time, I would go to the small kitchen in the office and take my tea there in solitude. The secretaries were not always so thoughtful. Some time later, when I was more experienced at the firm, I was dictating some information to a white secretary. When a white client whom she knew came into the office, she was embarrassed, and to demonstrate that she was not taking dictation from an African, she took a sixpence from her purse and said stiffly, "Nelson, please go out and get me some shampoo from the chemist." I left the room and got her shampoo. In the beginning, my work at the firm was quite rudimentary. As a combination of a clerk and a messenger, I would arrange and file documents and serve or deliver papers around Johannesburg. Later, I would draw up contracts for some of the firm's African clients. Yet, no matter how small the job, Mr. Sidelsky would explain to me what it was for and why I was doing it. He was a patient and generous teacher and sought to impart not only the details of the law but the philosophy behind it. His view of the law was broad rather than narrow, for he believed that it was a tool that could be used to change society. While Mr. Sidelsky imparted his views of the law, he warned me against politics. Politics, he said, brings out the worst in me. It was the source of trouble and corruption. and should be avoided at all costs. He painted a frightening picture of what would happen to me if I drifted into politics, and counseled me to avoid the company of men he regarded as troublemakers and rebel-rousers, specifically Gore Radaby and Walter Sisulu. While Mr. Sadelsky respected their abilities, he abhorred their politics. Gore was indeed a troublemaker, in the best sense of that term, and was an influential man in the African community in ways that Mr. Sadelsky did not know or suspect. He was a member of the advisory board in the Western Native Township, an elective body of 4 local people who dealt with the authorities on matters relating to the townships. While it had little power, the board had great prestige among the people. Gore was also, as I soon discovered, a prominent member of both the ANC and the Communist Party. Gore was his own man. He did not treat our employers with exaggerated courtesy, and often chided them for the treatment of Africans. "You people stole our land from us," he would say, "and enslaved us. Now you are making us pay through the nose to get the worst pieces of it back." One day, after I returned from doing an errand and entered Mr. Sadelsky's office, God turned to him and said, "Look, you sit there like a lord whilst my chief runs around doing errands for you. The situation should be reversed, and one day it will, and we will dump all of you into the sea." God then left the room, and Mr. Sadelsky just shook his head ruefully. God was an example of a man without a BA, who seemed infinitely better educated than the fellows who left Fort Hare with glittering degrees. Not only was he more knowledgeable, he was bolder and more confident. Although I intended to finish my degree and enter law school, I learned from Gore that a degree was not in itself a guarantee of leadership, and that it meant nothing unless one went out into the community to prove oneself. I was not the only article clerk at Witskin, Sadelsky and Edelman. A fellow about my age named Nat Bregman had started work shortly before I had. Nat was bright, pleasant, and thoughtful. He seemed entirely colorblind and became my first white friend. He was a deft mimic and could do fine imitations of the voices of Jan Smuts, Franklin Roosevelt, and Winston Churchill. I often sought his counsel on matters of law and office procedure, and he was unfailingly helpful. One day, at lunchtime, we were sitting in the office, and Nat took out a packet of sandwiches. He removed one sandwich and said, "Nelson, take hold of the other side of the sandwich." I was not sure why he asked me to do this, but as I was hungry, I decided to oblige. "Now pull," he said. I did so, and the sandwich split roughly in 2. "Now eat," he said. As I was chewing, Nat said, "Nelson, what we have just done symbolizes the philosophy of the Communist Party, to share everything we have." He told me he was a member of the party and explained the rudiments of what it stood for. I knew that Gore was a member of the party, but he had never canvassed for it. I listened to Nat that day and on many subsequent occasions when he preached the virtues of communism and tried to persuade me to join the party. I heard him out, asked questions, but did not join. I was not inclined to join any political organization, and the advice of Mr. Sadelsky was still ringing in my ears. I was also quite religious, and the party's antipathy to religion put me off. But I appreciated half that sandwich. I enjoyed Nat's company, and we often went about together, including to a number of lectures and CP meetings. I went primarily out of intellectual curiosity. I was just becoming aware of the history of racial oppression in my own country, and saw the struggle in South Africa as purely racial. But the party saw South Africa's problems through the lens of the class struggle. To them, it was a matter of the haves oppressing the have-nots. This was intriguing to me, but did not seem particularly relevant to present-day South Africa. It might have been applicable to Germany or England or Russia, but did not seem appropriate for the country that I knew. Even so, I listened and learned. Nat invited me to a number of parties where there was a mixture of whites, Africans, Indians, and colorados. The get-togethers were arranged by the party, and most of the guests were party members. I remember being anxious the first time I went, mainly because I did not think I had the proper attire. At Fort Hare, we were taught to wear a tie and jacket to a social function of any kind. Though my wardrobe was severely limited, I managed to find a tie to wear to the party. I discovered a lively and gregarious group of people who did not seem to pay attention to color at all. It was one of the first mixed gatherings I had ever attended, and I was far more of an observer than a participant. I felt extremely shy, wary of committing a faux pas, and unequipped to participate in the high flown and rapid fire conversations. My thoughts seemed undeveloped by comparison to the sophisticated dialogue around me. At one point in the evening, I was introduced to Michael Harmel, whom I was told had a master's degree in English from Rhodes University. I was impressed with his degree, but when I met him, I thought to myself, this chap has an MA and he is not even wearing a tie. I just could not reconcile this discrepancy. Later, Michael and I became friends, and I came to admire him greatly, in no small measure because he rejected so many of the rather foolish conventions I once embraced. He was not only a brilliant writer, but was so committed to communism that he lived in the same manner as an African, though he could have lived on a grander scale.